My father told me I wasn't his real daughter to cut me out of my grandmother's will. Only blood relatives deserve the family fortune, he declared. So I looked at him and said, "Do you promise to keep your word about it then?" And he said yes. He had a big surprise when The air in the lawyer's office was thick with tension, the kind that makes your throat dry and your palms sweat. Dust motes floated in the sunlight streaming through the blinds, and the faint scent of old paper and wood polish made the room feel like a tomb. I sat there, clutching the edge of the mahogany desk, my knuckles white. My father Mason stood across from me, his face a mask of cold indifference. His words still echoed in my ears, sharp and final. "Only blood relatives deserve the family fortune." For 19 years, I'd called him Dad. I'd believed we were bound by more than just name, by shared birthdays, inside jokes, and the way we both hated olives. But now, as he stood there in his tailored suit, his eyes devoid of any warmth, I realized I'd been living a lie. It all started 3 weeks ago, when Grandma Violet passed away. She was the kind of woman who commanded a room with a single raised eyebrow, a southern matriarch with a love for heirloom roses and bourbon. Her will was supposed to be straightforward. Her estate would be split between her son, Mason, and her grandchildren. But when the lawyer read the clause, biological descendants only, my father's lips curled into a smirk. Later, in the funeral home's parking lot, he cornered me. His breath reeked of whiskey and his voice was low, almost a growl. "Your mom slept around. You're not mine. Stay quiet, and I'll give you 10K. Fight me, and you'll get nothing." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My mom had passed away when I was 6, and I'd clung to the memories of her like a lifeline. Now Mason was using her to cut me out of my inheritance. I spent the next few days in a daze, scrolling through late-night Google searches for paternity tests, deleting the browser history before my boyfriend Jonah could notice. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Was any of it real? I wondered. The way we both had the same cowlick, the way we both laughed at the same stupid jokes. Was it all just a coincidence? Then there was Sienna, Mason's new wife. At the wake, she'd leaned in close, her perfume overpowering, and whispered, "Blood matters. You're just collateral." Her words stung, but they also lit a fire in me. I started digging. In Grandma Violet's attic, I found an old photo of Mason as a baby, his birth certificate tucked behind it. My heart raced as I read the words. Mother, Violet Ann Shaw. Father, unknown. Wait, Grandma's maiden name was Violet Ann Shaw. A crumpled letter in her desk confirmed it. I took Mason in as my own. His real mother couldn't keep him. But blood isn't everything. My hands trembled as I held the letter. What did this mean? The weight of the letter in my hands felt like a ticking bomb. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of a story I never knew existed. Grandma Violet had taken Mason in as her own. That meant he wasn't her biological son. And if he wasn't her blood, then his claim that only blood relatives deserved the inheritance was a lie he was using to cut me out. I sat on the dusty attic floor, surrounded by boxes of old photos and trinkets, my heart pounding. The air was thick with the scent of mothballs and memories. I reached for Grandma's antique locket, the one she'd given me before her stroke. It was gold, with her initials, VAS, engraved on the front. I'd worn it every day since her passing, a small piece of her I could keep close. I popped it open, and for the first time, I noticed something I hadn't before. Tucked inside, beside the tiny photo of her as a young woman, was another picture. A man I didn't recognize. He had sharp features and piercing eyes, and something about him felt familiar. My stomach churned as I realized who he might be. I needed answers. The next day, I drove to the local library, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. I spent hours poring over old newspapers and public records, my heart racing with every new discovery. Finally, I found it. A birth announcement from 1965. Violet Ann Shaw welcomes her son Mason, but there was no mention of a father. I dug deeper, my fingers trembling as I flipped through microfiche and scanned documents. And then I found it, a marriage certificate. Violet Ann Shaw had married a man named Thomas Reed in 1964, but the marriage was annulled just 6 months later. Thomas Reed disappeared from the records after that, as if he'd never existed. My mind spun. If Thomas Reed was Mason's father, why wasn't he listed on the birth certificate? And why had Grandma Violet never mentioned him? I needed proof. I needed DNA. I ordered a paternity test kit online, my hands shaking as I filled out the forms. When it arrived, I swabbed my cheek and sent it off, praying for answers. In the meantime, I kept digging. I found an old address for Thomas Reed and drove to the crumbling house on the edge of town. The place was abandoned, the windows boarded up, and the yard overgrown. But as I walked around the back, I noticed something, a small shed, its door slightly ajar. Inside, I found a box of letters. They were from Violet to Thomas, written in her elegant cursive. "I'll raise him as my own," she wrote in one, "but you'll never be part of his life." My heart ached as I read her words. She'd loved Mason enough to take him in, to raise him as her own, but she'd also kept secrets. Secrets that were now unraveling everything I thought I knew about my family. When the DNA results came back, I held my breath as I opened the email. The words on the screen made my heart stop. 47%. Shared genes with Violet's sister's grandson. I wasn't Mason's daughter, but I was Violet's granddaughter. By blood, the DNA results burned in my mind like a brand. I wasn't Mason's daughter, but I was Grandma Violet's granddaughter. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mason had tried to cut me out of the inheritance by claiming I wasn't his blood, but in doing so, he'd exposed his own secret. He wasn't her blood either. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the locket in my hands. The man in the photo, Thomas Reed, was my biological grandfather. Grandma Violet had loved him once, enough to marry him, but something had gone wrong. She'd raised Mason as her own, but she'd never told him the truth. truth, and now that truth was my only weapon. The final will reading was scheduled for the next day. I knew Mason would be there, smug and confident, ready to claim his prize, but I had a plan. I arrived at the lawyer's office early, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was just as I remembered it, dusty, cold, and suffocating. Mason was already there, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He didn't even look at me. The lawyer, a thin man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, cleared his throat and began reading the will. The estate of Violet Ann Shaw shall be divided equally among her biological descendants. Mason smirked, his eyes flicking to me for the first time. Guess that leaves you out, Harper, he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. I stood up, my legs trembling but my voice steady. Actually, it leaves you out. The room fell silent. Mason's smirk faltered. I reached into my bag and pulled out the documents. I'd gathered the adoption records, the DNA results, the letters from Grandma Violet to Thomas Reed. I slid them across the table to the lawyer, my hands shaking but my resolve unshaken. Mason isn't Violet's biological son, I said, my voice ringing in the silence. He was adopted, but I am her granddaughter, by blood. Mason's face turned pale, his smug confidence crumbling. That's impossible, he stammered, but the lawyer was already scanning the documents. This changes everything, the lawyer said, his voice grave. If these documents are authentic, then Harper is the sole heir to Violet's estate. Mason exploded. This is a setup. She's lying. But I wasn't done. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the locket, holding it up for everyone to see. Grandma Violet left me this. It's been in our family for generations. And inside, I popped it open, revealing the photo of Thomas Reed. This is my grandfather, Mason's father, but he's not Violet's son. The room was dead silent. Mason looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Blood isn't what makes a family, I said, my voice trembling but strong. But it sure makes a difference in a will. The lawyer nodded, his expression unreadable. Harper is correct. The estate passes to her. Mason lunged forward, his face red with rage. You little, but the lawyer stepped between us, his voice firm. This is over, Mason. The law is clear. I stood there, my heart racing, as Mason stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The silence in the lawyer's office was deafening after Mason left. I stood there, clutching the locket in my hand, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and gave me a small, sympathetic nod. Harper, he said gently, this is a lot to process, but legally, the estate is yours. I'll need some time to finalize the paperwork, but you're the sole heir. I nodded, my mind still reeling. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me like a physical force. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet, leaving me unsteady and unsure. I left the office and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the sunlight glaring off the pavement. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Jonah. I hesitated before answering, my voice shaky. Hey, I said, trying to sound normal. Harper, where are you? Are you okay? His voice was full of concern. I'm fine. I need to see you. Can you meet me at the park? Of course. I'll be there in 10. I walked to the park, my thoughts swirling. The locket felt heavy around my neck, a constant reminder of the secrets it held. When I reached the park, Jonah was already there, sitting on a bench under a sprawling oak tree. He stood up when he saw me, his face etched with worry. Harper, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost. I sat down on the bench, my hands trembling as I told him everything. The will, Mason's betrayal, the DNA test, the letters, the locket. Jonah listened in silence, his expression shifting from shock to anger to disbelief. Harper, this is insane, he said when I finished. I can't believe Mason would do something like that. And your grandma, she kept all of this hidden? I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. I don't even know who I am anymore, Jonah. My whole life feels like a lie. Jonah pulled me into a hug, his arms tight around me. You're still you, Harper. None of this changes that. You're strong and you're brave, and you just stood up to a man who tried to destroy you. That's who you are. I buried my face in his shoulder, letting the tears fall. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe, but the peace didn't last long. As we sat there, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from an unknown number. You think you've won, but you don't know the whole story. Meet me at the old Reed house tonight if you want the truth. My heart skipped a beat. The old Reed house, Thomas Reed's house, the one I'd found the letters in. What is it? Jonah asked, noticing my expression. I showed him the text. I don't know who this is, but I have to go. Jonah's face darkened. Harper, no. This could be dangerous. You don't know who's sending this. I have to know, Jonah, I said, my voice firm. I can't keep living in the dark. Jonah sighed, running a hand through his hair. Then I'm coming with you. The old Reed house loomed in the distance, its silhouette jagged against the night sky. The moon cast an eerie glow over the overgrown yard, and the wind whispered through the trees like a warning. Jonah and I stood at the edge of the property, our breaths visible in the cold air. This is a bad idea, Jonah muttered, his eyes scanning the dark windows of the house. This feels like the start of a horror movie. I clenched my fist, trying to steady my nerves. I don't have a choice. I need to know who sent that text and what they know. We approached the house cautiously, the crunch of dead leaves under our feet the only sound. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking as the wind pushed against it. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the flashlight on my phone. Hello? I called out, my voice trembling. No response. We stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. The house felt like a tomb frozen in time. Whoever sent that text better show themselves, Jonah said, his voice tight with tension. As we moved deeper into the house, I noticed something on the floor, a trail of fresh footprints in the dust. My heart raced as I followed them, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The trail led to a door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly open, a faint light spilling out from the crack. I pushed it open slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The room was small, lit by a single flickering bulb. In the center of the room stood a woman, her back to us. She was tall, with silver hair cascading down her shoulders. She turned slowly and my heart stopped. It was Sienna. You, I I whispered, my voice barely audible. Sienna smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Hello, Harper. I knew you'd come. Jonah stepped forward, his voice sharp. What the hell is this? What do you want? Sienna ignored him, her gaze fixed on me. You think you've won, don't you? You think you've uncovered all the secrets? But you're wrong. I took a step back, my mind racing. What are you talking about? Sienna reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph. She held it up and my stomach dropped. It was a picture of my mother, young and smiling, standing next to Thomas Reed. Your mother wasn't just some random woman who slept around, Sienna said, her voice dripping with venom. She was Thomas Reed's daughter, your grandfather. The room spun around me. That's not possible, I choked out. Oh, it's very possible, Sienna said, her smile widening. Your mother was Violet's stepdaughter, Mason's half-sister, and you're not just Violet's granddaughter. You're her great-granddaughter. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Why are you telling me this? Sienna's expression hardened. Because Mason isn't the only one who wants that inheritance. And if you think you're walking away with it, you're dead wrong. Before I could respond, the light flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The darkness was suffocating. I fumbled with my phone, my hands shaking as I turned the flashlight back on. The beam of light cut through the black, but Sienna was gone. The room was empty. The only sound the faint creak of the house settling. Where did she go? Jonah whispered, his voice tense. I shook my head, my heart pounding. I don't know, but we need to get out of here. We hurried back through the house, the shadows seeming to stretch and twist around us. My mind raced with Sienna's words. Great-granddaughter. The idea was too much to process. If my mother was Thomas Reed's daughter, that meant what? That I was even more tied to this mess than I thought? As we reached the front door, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking our path. I froze, my flashlight illuminating Mason's face. He looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot and his hair disheveled. Harper, he said, his voice low and gravelly. We need to talk. Jonah stepped in front of me, his voice firm. You've done enough, Mason. Leave her alone. Mason ignored him, his gaze locked on me. You don't understand what's happening. Sienna, she's not who you think she is. And you are? I shot back, my voice trembling with anger. You lied to me, Mason. You tried to cut me out of Grandma's will. Why should I trust you now? Mason's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he looked defeated. I didn't want to hurt you, Harper. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? I laughed bitterly. By telling me I wasn't your daughter? By trying to steal my inheritance? Mason ran a hand through his hair, his voice desperate. Sienna, she's dangerous. She's been manipulating all of us. She's the one who told me you weren't mine. She's the one who planted the idea in my head to cut you out of the will. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Why would she do that? Because she wants the money for herself, Mason said, his voice cracking. She's not just my wife, Harper. She's Thomas Reed's niece. She's been after the family fortune for years. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was even more twisted than I'd imagined. So what now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mason took a step closer, his eyes pleading. We need to work together. If we don't, Sienna will take everything. She's already one step ahead of us. I hesitated, torn between my anger and the desperate hope in Mason's eyes. Jonah squeezed my hand, his voice low. Harper, we can't trust him, not after everything he's done. But before I could respond, a noise from outside made us all freeze. The sound of a car engine, followed by the crunch of gravel under tires. Mason's face paled. She's here. The headlights of the car cut through the darkness, illuminating the overgrown yard. My heart raced as I peered through the cracked window, trying to see who was coming. The car door opened and Sienna stepped out, her silver hair gleaming under the moonlight. She wasn't alone. Two men followed her, their faces hard and unreadable. They moved with purpose, their eyes scanning the house like predators. We need to go, Jonah whispered, pulling me back from the window. Now! Mason grabbed my arm, his grip tight. There's a back door. Follow me. I hesitated, torn between my distrust of Mason and the urgency of the situation. But the sound of Sienna's voice outside, sharp and commanding, pushed me into action. Harper! She called, her voice echoing through the night. I know you're in there. Come out and we can talk like adults. Like hell, Jonah muttered, pulling me toward the back of the house. Mason led us through a narrow hallway, his movements quick and silent. We reached the back door, but as Mason reached for the handle, it swung open on its own. Standing there was one of Sienna's men, his expression cold and unyielding. Going somewhere? He asked, his voice low and menacing. Mason didn't hesitate. He lunged at the man, tackling him to the ground. Run! He shouted, his voice strained. Jonah and I didn't need to be told twice. We bolted out the door, the cold night air hitting us like a slap. We ran across the yard, our footsteps crunching on the dead leaves. Behind us, I could hear the sounds of a struggle. Mason and the man, grunting and cursing. This way, Jonah said, pulling me toward the trees. We disappeared into the woods, the darkness swallowing us whole. My lungs burned as we ran, branches scratching at my arms and face. I didn't dare look back. Finally, we reached a small clearing. Jonah stopped, doubling over to catch his breath. I leaned against a tree, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell is going on? Jonah asked, his voice shaky. Who are those people? I don't know, I said, my mind racing. But Mason was right about one thing. Sienna's dangerous, and she's not going to stop until she gets what she wants. Jonah looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. What do we do now? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. We need proof. Something that exposes Sienna for who she really is. If we can get that, we can stop her. Jonah nodded, his jaw set. Then let's find it. We moved through the woods, staying close to the edge of the property. My mind raced as I tried to piece together everything I knew. Sienna was Thomas Reed's niece. She'd been manipulating Mason, trying to get her hands on the inheritance. But why? What was she after? As we approached the house from the side, I noticed a light on in one of the upstairs windows. I grabbed Jonah's arm, pointing. Look, through the window, I could see Sienna. She was holding something, a small leather-bound book. She flipped through the pages, her expression intense. What is that? Jonah whispered. I don't know, I said, my heart racing. But I think it's the key to all of this. The sight of Sienna with the leather-bound book sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Whatever she was holding, it was important. I could feel it in my gut. I turned to Jonah, my voice low but urgent. We need to get that book. Jonah's eyes widened. How? She's not just going to hand it over. I glanced around, my mind racing. The house was surrounded by overgrown bushes and trees, providing some cover. If we could get inside without being seen, maybe we could find a way to distract her. There's a side door, I whispered, pointing to a small entrance partially hidden by ivy. If we're careful, we can get in without her noticing. Jonah hesitated, his face pale. Harper, this is insane. What if she catches us? Then we'll deal with it, I said, my voice firm. But we can't let her win. Not after everything she's done. Jonah nodded reluctantly, and we crept toward the side door. The old hinges creaked as I pushed it open, the sound making my heart skip a beat. But Sienna didn't seem to notice. We slipped inside, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint rustle of pages from upstairs. I motioned for Jonah to follow me, and we moved through the shadows, our footsteps soft on the creaky wooden floor. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, I paused, listening. Sienna's voice drifted down from above, low and murmuring as if she were talking to herself. Almost there, she said, her tone almost gleeful. Just a little more and it's all mine. I exchanged a glance with Jonah, my stomach churning. What was she talking about? We climbed the stairs slowly, careful to avoid the steps that groaned under our weight. At the top, I peeked around the corner. Sienna was in the room at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar. The leather-bound book was on the desk in front of her, and she was scribbling something in a notebook, her movements frantic. We need to get closer, I whispered to Jonah. He nodded, his face tense. We crept down the hall, our breath shallow. Just as we reached the door, the floorboard beneath me let out a loud crack. Sienna's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto mine. Harper, she said, her voice cold and sharp. I was wondering when you'd show up. I froze, my heart pounding. Jonah stepped in front of me, his voice steady. It's over, Sienna. Whatever you're planning, it's not going to work. Sienna smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, sweet boy, you have no idea what I'm planning. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver key. My eyes widened as I recognized it. It was the key to Grandma Violet's safe. You're too late, Sienna said, her voice dripping with triumph. I already have everything I need. Before I could react, she grabbed the leather-bound book and bolted for the door. Jonah lunged at her, but she sidestepped him, her movements quick and precise. Stop her, I shouted, but it was too late. Sienna was already halfway down the stairs, her laughter echoing through the house. Jonah and I chased after her, but by the time we reached the front door, she was gone. The sound of a car engine roared to life, and her taillights disappeared into the night. I stood there, my chest heaving, a sinking feeling in my stomach. What do we do now? Jonah asked, his voice shaky. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. We find out what's in that book, and we stop her before it's too late. The sound of Sienna's car faded into the distance, leaving us standing in the cold night air, our breaths visible in the moonlight. My mind raced as I tried to process what had just happened. Sienna had the book, the key to everything, and she was gone. We need to call the police, Jonah said, pulling out his phone. I shook my head, my voice firm. No, not yet. We don't have proof of anything. She'll just twist it, make us look like the crazy ones. Jonah frowned, his face pale. Then what do? We can't just let her get away with this. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. We need to figure out what's in that book. If we can find out what she's after, we can stop her. Jonah nodded reluctantly, and we headed back inside the house. The room where Sienna had been was still lit, the desk cluttered with papers and notes. I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the mess. There were maps, old photographs, and pages of handwritten notes. My stomach churned as I realized what I was looking at, a detailed plan. Sienna had been researching the family history for years, piecing together every detail. Look at this, Jonah said, holding up a photograph. It was a picture of Grandma Violet standing next to a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, with sharp features and piercing eyes. Thomas Reed. On the back of the photo, someone had written, Violet and Thomas, 1964, the beginning of the end. I flipped through the notes, my hands trembling. Sienna had been tracking the family's assets, from the estate to the heirlooms. But one thing stood out, a mention of a hidden vault somewhere on the property. A vault? Jonah asked, his brow furrowed. Grandma Violet never mentioned anything about a vault, I said, my mind racing. But if it exists and Sienna knows about it, Jonah's eyes widened. That's what she's after. Whatever's in that vault, she thinks it's worth everything. I nodded, my heart pounding. We need to find it before she does. We spent the next hour searching the house, looking for any clue that might lead us to the vault. But the more we searched, the more frustrated I became. The house was a maze of hidden corners and forgotten rooms, and we were running out of time. Finally, I found something, a small brass key hidden in the back of a drawer in Grandma Violet's old desk. It was tarnished with age, but the initials VAS were engraved on the handle. This has to be it, I said, holding it up. Jonah's eyes lit up.
Where does it go?
I thought back to the house's layout, trying to remember any place we hadn't checked, and then it hit me. The cellar. We hurried downstairs, the key clutched tightly in my hand. The cellar door was hidden behind a stack of old boxes, the wood warped and splintered. I inserted the key, my hands shaking as I turned it. The lock clicked and the door creaked open. Inside, the air was damp and cold, the walls lined with shelves of dusty jars and forgotten trinkets. But at the far end of the room, there was a metal door, its surface rusted but solid. This is it, I whispered, my heart racing. We approached the door, the key fitting perfectly into the lock. As I turned it, the door groaned open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. And there, in the center of the room, was a safe. The safe was old, its metal surface pitted with rust but still imposing. My hands trembled as I reached for the combination dial, my mind racing. What was inside? Money, jewelry, or something else else entirely. Jonah stood beside me, his flashlight illuminating the safe. Do you know the combination? I shook my head, my stomach twisting. No, but Grandma Violet always said she kept important things close to her heart. I thought back to the locket around my neck, the one Grandma had given me before she passed. I popped it open, revealing the tiny photo of her and the engraving on the back. VAS 1964. 1964, I whispered, turning the dial. Maybe that's it. I spun the dial to 1964, holding my breath as I pulled the handle. The safe door creaked open, the sound echoing in the small room. Inside, there was a stack of documents, a small velvet pouch, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. My heart pounded as I reached for the envelope, my fingers trembling as I tore it open. The letter was written in Grandma Violet's elegant handwriting, the ink faded but still legible. My dearest Harper, if you're reading this, it means you found the safe. I'm sorry for all the secrets, but I had to protect you. The truth is, Mason isn't my biological son. I took him in when he was a baby after his mother, my stepdaughter, passed away. But you, my darling, are my true heir. The documents in this safe prove your lineage. The velvet pouch contains heirlooms that belong to you. And the rest? Well, let's just say Sienna isn't the only one who's been keeping secrets. Be careful, Harper. Not everyone is who they seem. With all my love, Grandma Violet. I set the letter down, my hand shaking as I reached for the velvet pouch. Inside was a stunning diamond necklace, its stones catching the light like fire. Jonah let out a low whistle. That's incredible. But my attention was already on the stack of documents. I flipped through them, my heart racing as I realized what they were. Deeds to properties, stock certificates, and a will that named me as the sole beneficiary of Grandma Violet's estate. This is it, I whispered, my voice breaking. This is what Sienna was after. Jonah's face was pale. Harper, this is a lot. What are you going to do? I took a deep breath, my mind racing. I'm going to stop her. Once and for all. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed from the cellar stairs. I froze, my heart pounding as Sienna's voice rang out, cold and sharp. I knew you'd find it, she said, stepping into the room. Her eyes gleamed as she looked at the safe, her smile twisting into something predatory. But you're too late, Harper. It's mine now. I stood my ground, the documents clutched tightly in my hands. No, Sienna. It's over. Her smile faltered, but only for a moment. We'll see about that. The screen cuts to black with the sound of the locket snapping shut.